YouTube as well.
Okay.
Okay, we'll call this council meeting to order at 6 p.m. Need a motion for adoption of the minutes, please.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held at City Hall on April 8th, 2019 be adopted as circulated.
Moved by Councillor Budds and seconded by Councillor.
So seconded.
Seconded by Councillor Meyer. Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. April is Poetry Month, and for part of our 2019 Poetry City Challenge, we have a reading this evening by Terry Todd. And this is the first time that Terry's read poetry up here. She's done other things up here, but so we'll turn the podium over to you.
Well, thank you. Good evening. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for honoring National Poetry Month. I do not consider myself a prolific poet by any stretch, but I have 3 short ones here from over the years that I'm delighted to share with you this evening. In 1999, I was trying to explain to my husband that what I really wanted for Christmas was a good thesaurus, but I couldn't get my tongue around the word, and so this poem was born. It's called The Source for Us. If I had a good thesaurus for us, no, wait, I mean thesaurus, I'd be a dandy writer. They'd be sure to publicize, but its pronounceability confounds my tongue's agility. Please help me find another word for my desired prize. Now, in 2005, I don't know if you know this, but it was a big year for apples in Portage la Prairie. I had 1 tree and more apples than I could handle, so I had to recruit some help. And on that day, this poem is the story of that day, and there will be pictures on the screen, if our technology works, of that day. But this poem is also interactive. When I get to the last 2 words, I want you all to say the last 2 words with me. You will know what they're going to be, trust me. It's called The Happiest Appliest Day. The apple tree bowed to the ground with its load. I picked and I plucked till I thought I'd explode. How would I grapple with all of this fruit? I needed some help to transmute all the loot. I promised adventure and thrills beyond measure for all who'd assist with no show of displeasure. Then 3 favorite redheads showed up at my door to tackle the apples arranged on the floor. 2 sisters, their mother, the apples, and me. A fine autumn day, what fun this could be. We cleared off the counters, the table, the sink, and cranked up the music too loudly to think. I was the pastry chef, ready and willing. Gail was peeling and Allison filling. Veronica fluttered from station to station, now peeling, now tasting in anticipation. The flour was flying, the rolling pin rolled, the peelings were reeling, the cinnamon gold. Like a well-oiled, skillful precision machine, we toiled till we reached pie number 13. We paused for some lunch in the mess. What a scene. Then onward and upward to pie 17, now 19, now 20. We kept on a-going. The sugar was shaking, the apple juice flowing. What would we run out of first? Time or flour? Apples or pie plates or shortening or power? With pie 35, we declared the job done, cleaned up the kitchen and called it all fun. Then Veronica, Allison, Gail, and I treated ourselves to what else? Apple pie. Well done. And lastly, this one was written in honor of my mother's 80th birthday, so I brought her with me. Her name is Norma, and she's right over here. Hello. It's called When I Turn 80. When I turn 80, if I do, I hope I'll have learned a thing or two, like tackling new things, big and small, like swinging a club at a little ball, like cheering at a Bombers game and dressing like a classy dame, like how to bake the best darn buns and playing Scrabble just for fun, to write a book that blesses others, to love with devotion that never smothers, to daily pray for all my kids and grandkids too, and great-grandkids, to never spread a nasty rumor, but always keep my sense of humor, to know that hard roads lead to faith, to walk in mercy, love, and grace. I hope I'm known as someone kind, who helped to stretch another's mind, who's dabbled with a little art, who's known for her gracious heart. When I turn 80, if I do, I hope I'll be a lot like you. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Council has a little gift for coming up and sharing our beautiful poetry with us this evening. Thank you very much. So we have one delegation this evening. I'm going to ask Mr. Ron DeCare to take the podium, please.
Thank you, council members. I'd like to make a special thanks to Melissa Draycott, councillor. It was her suggestion for me to come here, and I'd like to thank Diane for all her help to get me set up. My name is Ron DeCare. I'm the chairperson for the Portage Rural MS Support Group. We just started in February, as Mayor Ferris was there, and we're excited what's happened in the past 2 months. But I think we need to get the word out even further. Right now, what we've done or have accomplished in 2 months is started seminars for people with MS or their caregivers. Recently, we just had a seminar on reflexology for them to help get through the day-to-day issues of muscles or stress or even depression. We are moving forward. In June of 16th, 2019, we have a young lady by the name of Robin Lynn Claus, and she's an actual mobile muscle therapist. And if we can provide that kind of service for those with MS to have their therapy at home, I think it would be an advantage for them in itself. We are moving forward. Right now, I'm here for a call to arms because we need to have people be aware that we are now open for business. Don't be afraid to contact us. Don't be afraid that just because you have MS, you should hide in your house. We want you to be a part of this community. Our group is a community-based support group. We're there for you. If you need us to shovel your driveways in the winter, if you just want to talk, if you want to go for a coffee, we are in the process of other fundraising initiatives. We want the word out there now. Presently, we are working with PAWS to do a new fundraiser in October. I'm not going to go into it any further as we got to make sure it can be done. But we are finding ways to raise money. No, we are not a charitable organization yet. Unfortunately, we have to be up and running to determine what we need as a charitable foundation, what we're going to use the money for. And we're almost there. We've already talked to our accountant, and probably in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be applying again to be a charitable foundation. What I'm hoping the city will do is get the word out. I provided Diane with some business cards. We have our website out, www.portageruralms.com. It's up and running. On there is resources. We even have books from the library that people can access. If they want to look up for resources, we're in the process of purchasing more for them. There's also on there, we're keeping in ties with MS Society. If they have something available people need to know, then we have it on the site. We are doing everything possible to make the information available for those with MS to come and say, listen, can you help me with this? Recently, we just helped Jennifer. She had a situation where she lost her doctor in Winnipeg. We're also in the process of already doing that. We contacted the president for the Manitoba Society of MS, and she's provided us with some contact information, and now she has that. So hopefully we move forward from there. We are a positive group. We're moving forward. I'm doing this because our daughter got diagnosed 3 years ago. She may have had it longer. But what I've learned from my daughter is she's not letting it decide her life. And that's what's so fun about this. And she's taught me that it's not about me. It's about her. It's about those with MS. It shouldn't stop you from doing anything. It shouldn't stop you from not participating in anything. Come on out. Let's have some fun. I don't care what stage of MS you're at. You're more than invited. We want you there. So I'm going to put a challenge to City Council here. We have the thing called Festival of Trees. Mayor Ferris knows about this. Ms. Knox knows about this. And I was hoping that you would challenge the RM to donate a Christmas tree for our event and see how many will put tickets in it, and maybe what you guys can do, whoever wins with the most tickets, maybe buy the other council a pizza lunch or something like that. I think that would help if the city and the RM would participate in that fundraising and let them know it's about MS, and it's about raising the money here. We have a saying now, raised here, stays here, used here, and that's what the money's for. We're not stopping the MS Society from doing their walk. That's their annual thing. That's what they use to do research, and that's great. But we need to have funds in here in Portage now. I would say in the past 2 months, we've met up with 6 to 7 new MS people that nobody knew about. And that's just from word of mouth. So obviously, it's going to get worse. And they're saying it's going to get worse by 2030. And we need to have a group like this here so people have somewhere to go to talk. And we're working on that. Right now, we're running out of our home. And our home is open to those who need assistance, who like to sit down and have a coffee and talk. Or if anybody needs a ride somewhere, we are available. And I just want people to know that. We're open for business. Let people know. And I hope you'll take up that challenge and challenge the RM. And let's make some fun out of this Festival of Trees, because we have a different idea coming up this year. The other idea I'm going to throw out there too, I don't know if some of you would do this, but we're going to try and have an ugly Christmas sweater contest. And I'd love to see a few of you out there to see what you guys can do with that. So if you have any questions, please, I don't mind answering them now. I've given Diane some business cards. It's got all our information, our Gmail, our website, and also the Facebook account. We have, on our Facebook, we've had a lot of people access that, and it's just going to take time. People with MS are reluctant, and we're learning that right now. Not because they don't want to talk to you, but because I think they're still dealing with it. And it's just going to take a little time for them to understand that we're here for them, and we want to be here for them. So if you know of anybody, please get them to call us. We're there. That's what we're there for, and we're going to help them out. I appreciate your time. Thank you for inviting me for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron, for presenting. Did Council have any questions? Councillor Knox?
I don't so much have a question. I just would like to congratulate you, because I think we met 2 years ago at least, and we have the same wanting to make sure that our services are rural and make sure that we get the same services out here that we do in the city. So I think you are well on your way of accomplishing that, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other? Councillor Meyer?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I certainly want to echo Councillor Knox's comments there, but I also want to just take a moment to thank you as well for having the courage and the determination to take a group from grassroots. I have an uncle that has suffered from in advanced stages of MS, so I am a bit familiar with the
disease, yes.
with the disease, and I just want to thank you for taking the courage to be able to get out there, certainly, and us be aware of it in the general public.
I will add to that, because when our daughter was diagnosed, we had nobody to talk to. I don't think our daughter had either, because the way things were done here weren't exactly consistent. And I don't want anyone to go through what my wife and I went through. We lost 2 nights' sleep, so I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Draycott?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Ron, for coming out. I did meet Ron, actually, at the expo recently in town, and he was able to give me some information about what they have going on for this MS support group. And then my suggestion was that this is such a great initiative. Lots of times as council we hear, what is council doing about this? What is council doing about that? This is just one of those great stories about somebody taking some initiative in town and getting something done where there's a hole, where there could be some support to happen. So I want to say thank you very much for coming tonight and being open to giving us some information and letting other people know. I'd also say if there's an ugly sweater competition, count me in. Thank you very much.
I get a few extra.
Any further questions or comments from council? Ron, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming out this evening. I was very impressed with your, I guess, initial organizational meeting in the dead of winter, last winter. And I think you're doing fine with getting the word out. As Councillor Knox said, there's a lot of people talking about your group. I think there was a presenter at Rotary today, so people are hearing about it. And MS is a disease that has touched most families in Portage. If you ever look at a map, I don't know why, but we seem to have a very, very high incidence of MS here in our community. So this is something I think a lot of the community will benefit from. So thank you again.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good.
Now we're going to move into some public hearings. Before we do, I just want to let people know what to expect from a public hearing. So when there's a public hearing, I'm going to open the public hearing. People have up to 10 minutes to speak for or against the hearing, do a presentation, register an objection. Questions go through the chair. We ask the proponents, the supporter, of the issue to speak first, and then we'll ask people to speak that are opponents to it. And we're going to try to ask a speaker for the issue to speak, and then somebody that's against it, and hear from everybody. The proponent gets a chance to respond to questions or objections that have been raised. And objections are received for consideration and noted by council. Okay, we'll open the first hearing. So we'll open the public hearing for conditional use PC 17-19. This is for Restabit Inc., Prairie Vineyard Christian Fellowship. And I'm going to ask if there's anyone here to speak to the hearing. Marion, can you give us your name for the record? And Diane was wondering if you could spell your last name.
That's Miriam Turiamujika, last name Turyamwijaka.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. As you may know, we started in November 2018. Somebody had a question online, and then we decided to form a group from that. It was regarding somebody who is homeless and what we can do for that person. Currently, there is no shelter in Portage. Anytime there is a need and somebody is working to help that person find shelter, they send them to Winnipeg or Brandon. Or they send them to Tim Hortons with a little money for coffee to sip on as long as they can. So there are a few other things. CMHA is filling some gaps, and RHA is filling some other gaps. But if you are homeless, you don't have an address, and therefore you don't have Manitoba Health, and the list continues. So that's why we saw the need. That's why we wanted to address it in some way. With 150 Women Who Care event, we were the winners of the $10,000, which we're very excited about. With that, we would like to do a 3-month pilot. So that would be 3 nights a week and for 3 months, just to figure out what exactly the needs are, also to figure out what we need to learn, so that going forward, once we find our permanent location, then we can have something established well. And in the meantime, we're also seeing a need. We've heard of lots of people that have been homeless since we started, so I get calls once in a while that somebody's homeless and do you have anything yet? And right now we have nothing. So we're also just seeing the urgency. This location will be temporary, and it will end in August because it has to. And then our permanent location will be elsewhere. So that'll be once we get a building of our own. So this conditional use is just for that pilot. And I'd also like to add that we are very willing to work with any concerns that might arise from people in the community or from council. We have things in place. We're working with the RCMP and the RHA. ENIA we've been in contact with because they're wondering what to do with some people that have become homeless while on ENIA. So yeah, so we're trying to work with everybody, and any community members who have further concerns, we want to make sure we can address those. And this is a community thing. We're trying to keep it, it's not just one entity. We want to make sure it's everybody's involved and it's everybody addressing the issue.
Did council have any questions for the presenter? Okay, thank you very much, Marion. Is there anyone else here to speak to the hearing? For or against? And last call, is there anyone here to speak to the hearing? This is for conditional use PC 1719 for Restabit Inc., Prairie Vineyard Christian Fellowship. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the hearing.
Be it resolved that the public hearing for conditional use PC 1719, Rest a Bit Inc. and Prairie Vineyard Christian Fellowship at 109 Duke Avenue now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Meyer and seconded by Councillor Draycott. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
Okay, and on the agenda, of course, in relationship to what we just heard there, Council, you'll see a request for conditional use. So, of course, it's to allow for an emergence shelter as an accessory use. So, of course, we have the opportunity to approve it with conditions, or, of course, to deny it as well. So just to give you a bit of background, which I think our individual spoke to there very, very well. It would consist at Prairie Vineyard Christian Fellowship Church. There's the ones that have applied for the conditional use to allow an emergency shelter as an accessory use. The emergency shelter would be open on a trial basis for 3 months and would be open 3 nights a week from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. The doors would close at 9 and no guests would be allowed to go out. No further admittance would be allowed after 9 o'clock. So as you heard, it is just a trial period, and it would be run out of that location. Once that trial period is done, they may or may not, depending on circumstances, look for a separate location. At that point, they may have to reapply for a new conditional use. The application was circulated to the various city departments. There was a concern, the concern being about life safety issues of the building. And so all fire, life, safety, and exiting will need to be reviewed and upgraded as needed to ensure that all occupant safety would be addressed. Now, I don't know, Your Worship, if it's appropriate right now. I would like to get Canal they have visited with that. Is that the appropriate time to ask that question?
That's fine.
Canal, if I could get you to speak to that. I do know that you had mentioned that you and our fire chief had visited with them.
Yes, our office and fire department met at Prairie Vineyard Church, and we met with the proponents, and we went over the life safety issues, and we discussed different items they had to do. And I forwarded all those concerns to them, and I just got Miriam gave me a letter tonight saying they'll abide by them, no problem. So we'll go back for review once they're ready, if the conditional use is approved, and we'd go back and look at it and confirm that they're all done then.
Excellent. I just felt as council it was important to know that they've already met and addressed those issues as well. So, with that said, I would like to make a motion. I'd like to be it resolved that the council of the city of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of Rest a Bit Inc., Prairie Vineyard Christian Fellowship, to allow for an emergency shelter as an accessory use in a C2 central commercial zone at the property 109 Duke Avenue, which is legally described as Lot 1, Plan 41708, Parish of Portage la Prairie, with the condition that all fire and life safety issues are reviewed and addressed. I so move.
Moved by Councillor Meyer and seconded by Councillor Knox. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
Okay, next item on the list, Your Worship, with your permission, I'm going to remove myself, just due to maybe a possible conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing for variation order PC 21-19. This is for Laws Automotive Inc. at 510 Saskatchewan Avenue East. Is there anyone here to speak to the hearing? You can go ahead and take the podium. And can you state your name for the record, please?
Kelly Law. Kelly? Yes, Kelley.
Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Myself and my husband own the property at 510 Saskatchewan Avenue East. It's Laws Automotive. We are wanting to get a shipping container for extra storage as our building. We are busting at the seams, and it's the most financially feasible for us as opposed to a fixed renovation attaching onto the building. And where we would like to have it, I'm not sure if you guys can see that there. is tucked kind of off on the corner. Beside the building, there is trees to one side of it to shelter it, and then the back side also faces a back lane intersection, so it's not an eyesore to people as much as possible. As opposed to the other location on our property that would fit it would be out in the open and very visible from the avenue and from people's front yards. So, not sure what else to say.
Are you open for questions now?
Yeah.
Councillor Buds.
This item I'm familiar with, as I sit on the planning district and was reviewed there, and just for council's benefit, it's also going to be recessed from the front of your building,
Yes.
correct? So
Yes.
it'll be recessed a little bit back from the front edge of your building.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions from council? Councillor Draycott?
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps not to the proponent. I don't see a sketch in ours. Did you happen to bring a picture?
Absolutely.
The sketch is, there's two things here. One's a conditional use and one's a variation order. The first one is a conditional use, the second one is a variation order, and the variation order has a sketch in it.
Has the sketch in it? I don't. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you mind if we pass it around?
Yeah, this.
I don't think it's there, Canal.
Here.
In second.
So Saskatchewan Avenue.
Yeah.
Here?
Pull it up and email to Catherine.
Property there. This is just my own
Yeah, you betcha.
story.
And this was the other area.
Yeah, so this fits with the proper yard requirements there, but would be an eyesore.
Right.
So here, and this is a tree line. There's cedar trees here, and right here is the intersection of the back lane.
Just so I'm not the only one seeing it, do you mind if I pass it around? Thank you. So,
I'm familiar with
you're
the item.
familiar?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that is this.
Oh, there it is.
But they
It's a
can
little
see it.
closer.
You got your question answered, Councillor?
Yes, I'm not sure if all of council can see the sketch over there, though.
Familiar with
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from council? No more questions? Thank you very much for presenting. Is there anyone else here to speak to the public hearing? This is variation order PC 2119 for Laws Automotive, 1510 Saskatchewan Avenue East.
No.
Okay, entertain a motion to close the hearing.
On the right one?
I so move that public hearing for conditional use PC 20-19 Law Automotive now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Espy. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
Okay, the item we have here tonight is to, as we know, is to allow for a shipping container in a C3 Avenue commercial zone. We just heard that Laws Automotive has applied for a conditional use, and we also heard that they want to have a storage site there. So we know that they want to locate it on the west side of their building, as this is the most desirable place. We have done this in the past. There's one done on PC 6917, and that was located at 340 Lorne Avenue. We did circulate this amongst our departments with one concern expressed over the aesthetics, and I think that's been addressed in some of the commentary in terms of the location of that container. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of Laws Automotive, Inc. to allow for a shipping container in a C3 Avenue commercial zone at the property known as 510 Saskatchewan Avenue East, which is legally described as lots 3/5, Plan 82, Parish, Portage la Prairie.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Espy. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Excuse me. We're going to open the public hearing for variation order PC 2119. This is for Laws Automotive at 510 Saskatchewan Avenue East. And is there anyone here to speak to the hearing?
that is just for the actual location.
Okay.
So that's part 2 of it, is having it on the west side of that building there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak to the hearing? Okay, need a motion to close the hearing?
Be it resolved, and I so move that public hearing for variation order PC 21-19 Laws Automotive Inc. now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Spee. All those in favor? And that's carried.
So on this particular item, we're familiar with it, but there is some side yard and rear yard reductions that we need to entertain, and that's from 4.6 meters down to 0.9 meters, and rear yard requirement of 7.9 meters down to 1.2. And so I'm not going to go through it because we do know the item that we're up for discussion here, and we do have the same concern from city departments just to deal with the aesthetics, but I think we've, again, addressed that. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move, that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the variation request of Laws Automotive Incorporated to vary the following. Side yard requirement of 4.6 meters to be reduced to 0.9 meters, and rear yard requirement of 7.5 meters to be reduced to 1.9 or 1.2 meters. At the property known as 510 Saskatchewan Avenue East, which is legally described as lots 3/5, Plan 82, Parish of Portage la Prairie.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Draycott. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Our next hearing is for the tax levy bylaw. This is 19-8693. And I'm going to ask Councillor Buds, who's going to present first, and then we're going to open up the podium for questions from the public. Councillor Buds.
Thank you. So we know that this evening we have a public hearing for our tax levy bylaw, 19-8693, and what we've done is prepared a financial presentation, and I think, yeah, that's up on the screen now. So several slides have been put together, just really outlining the tremendous growth in our city, and you can see that administration on the second slide there has outlined some of the investments that private industry and to that matter the city as well is making making in our city and region over the next number of years. And so 2019 major projects, we know, and we've talked a lot about our Crescent Causeway and build year number 1 and the things that are going to happen with that. Again, we talk a lot about the water systems, both the treatment and wastewater, and asset management. So 2019 is the beginning of numerous projects in our city, and I think citizens here can get used to progress, but that comes with construction. And so several of those initiatives are going to be underway in 2019 and beyond. So we did include, although the information has been shared in the past, we did include a little bit of the stage 1 construction phases for 2019 as it relates to the Causeway. And I know that in the presentation, the detailed drawings that we received from our engineer and AECOM are included, and they're a little tough to read, but there will be a significant amount of work that is completed throughout 2019 on the Causeway, which will lead us into 2020. And there will be some changes in the traffic flow in that area, and so we're obviously cognizant of the fact that it's going to put a little bit of a cramp in some of the normal style of traffic in those areas, and we ask for people's patience as we go through that over the next number of months. And Councillor Wall's favorite topic on the next slide is a closer look at water. And phase 1 our low-rate anaerobic reactor. Did I get that right, Councillor Wall? Yeah, at the wastewater plant. That is a project that will continue in earnest in 2019. And then we are also, which is, we talk a lot about wastewater, but there's a significant amount of money that's being spent also at the water treatment plant. And phase 2A and B will be underway in 2019. Asset management, phase 1 in 2019, really getting a policy and a strategy. And when we say asset management, we really take a look at all of the assets under council's management here at our city, and not necessarily just council, but our administrative managers, that the assets they look after, and having an inventory over what needs to be replaced and modeling that with a risk assessment to say when do we need to take a look at investing in these assets and what priority that needs to take precedent over one over the other. And so that's a major project that will continue in 2019 and really helps administration and council plan for the future when it's done on more of a priority basis in terms of need. So we just wanted to highlight some of the budgeted general revenues and where those monies come from. So you can see in the next slide the property taxes, the grants, the sales of city services, our tax sharing agreement, where we get federal government granting for our 2019 budget. We get fines, transfers to reserves, other taxes. So you can see that really the lion's share of our dollars do come from property taxes. And that amounts to just about $19 million for 2019. My slide on my, although when I looked at this, this was a graph, and now it looks like blank. So all it did was graph out our general revenue. Are you seeing the same thing there, Kathy? Yeah. Yeah. So all that slide would have been a graphical representation of that in terms of, I think it's a pie chart that we had in there.
Or February in Portage.
Or February in Portage. Thank you, Councillor Meyer. So on the other side, we collect monies, and then to understand where those monies are expended. And this next page in the presentation is the expenses. And so, protective services at 31% of our budget, over just about $6 million, really representing our fire and police. The fiscal at 3.9, general government, and then you can see as we scale down, representing the departments and approximately the dollars that are spent in those areas. And again, looking at about $19 million in expenditures. Yeah, and again, now we're in March.
We're in March.
So again, all. No, that's fine, Kathy. Don't worry about it. We'll continue on slide 11 of 22. So all, again, those were just pie graphs showing the expenditures represented graphically. So 2019 budgeted utility revenue, switching over to that side, is where do the monies come from when we talk about our utility side of things. And you can see water and sewer sales. So very large, and we know that we've been working very diligently with the province and the federal government in understanding Portage and area's role when it comes to servicing the wet industry in our province. And you can see by the revenue at 34% of industrial users creating $3.9 million in water and sewer sales. It's just a very significant portion to our utility, and residential making up the 25%. Poplar Bluff Industrial Park. So, as I mentioned before, you can see that the very significant impact that industry has in our area. There's some graphs on utility revenue, and you can see all revenue sources and then our utility customers. So again, we just wanted to highlight where does those monies, once we've received them, where are they expended? And you can see that we've been putting significant amounts of money into capital. That is not a new topic in our area for water and wastewater, and 57% of that, or almost $17 million in 2019, goes into capital. And as we prepare for all of the investment that's happening in our region for this year and into the future. So slide 14, 2019 budgeted capital, just highlighting some of the areas on both the general and utility side on where the expenditures are going to happen. And I did talk a little bit about what's happening on phase 1 in the Island Park Bridge. There will be approximately $3 million spent this year, and we're doing an upgrade of a small truck over at the fire department. Is just highlighting a couple items. But an enormous amount of money, again, being spent in our utility over the course of 2019, and highlighted there with the first two items, just about at $20 million in an expenditure. So very significant amount of money that's being spent again, preparing for the future. And you know, there's a lot of times when our residents and citizens don't necessarily see that. They have an expectation of infrastructure dollars being spent, and it's not glamorous. When you spend that money on those types of utilities, that's not something you visually see other than construction happening, but it doesn't really affect you know, a day-to-day visual representation of that enormous amount of expenditure. But rest assured that is future planning at its best. So what does that look like in 2019's mill rate? And I can see that there is a small change in there. Just again, in this graph, it says 2018 and 2018. One does represent 2019. So a small change in the city's mill rate going up. And we see at the school division, after we've understood what their their mill rate was being set at. So what impact does that have on a house? And we've always used the average assessment of $250,000. And so you can see there on slide 16 is 2018 taxes, municipal portion around $2,335, small change in 2019 of approximately $33. So there will be a change to taxation in the city, but it's not going to be a very significant amount, and really points to the due diligence and fiscal responsibility that this council has kept at the forefront of its decision making as it relates to taxation and our competitiveness in the marketplace. So we did keep it below, I would consider, the cost of living adjustment in the province. There is another change, though, a significant change that's going to impact residents in the city, and I think we just wanted to highlight this because it really is not, and I want to repeat this very clearly as I did before in another report, this is not anything to do with the city of Portage la Prairie and the assessment or the taxation of their property as it relates to anything that the city is imposing. So the Manitoba government passed a legislative amendment in 2018 changing how this credit, which is the Manitoba Education Property Tax Credit, is applied to homeowners for 2019 and forward. And so that credit now only applies to school taxes up to the total of these taxes, whereas before that credit could have been applied to property taxes. And so the provincial government said that is no longer going to be acceptable. And as a result of that, there is going to be some homeowners with modest home values will pay significantly more. And so there are notifications being sent out to all affected residents in the city of Portage, and will be going out with their property tax bills with special notification. And again, that is not something that is the city of Portage la Prairie driven. That is a legislative provincial government change. So just really wanted to highlight that. So just determining your property taxes, step one is determine the 2009 assessed value of your property, and that is obviously available on the provincial assessment website, and we've got that there for the public. You can compare that to your 2018 property tax bill, and as always, we will have the tax impact calculator on our website. So, at least from my chair over the last 8+ years, I have been a very strong proponent of understanding where a mill rate compares to our peers and what historically our mill rate's been doing, and there is a good representation of what the mill rate has been doing in our province, or sorry, not in our province, but in our city over the last number of years, and there has been a positive trend in reductions in mill rate. And really, again, a testament to the hard work of our administrative teams and managers to understand that, you know, that's hard to do in an environment where costs continue to rise. So, very good job. And the next slide there compares the city mill rates with some of our peers. This isn't always an accurate assessment because some of these jurisdictions do have separate levies, but we're just comparing mill rates. And for example, you could have a public safety levy that is a one-off on a property tax bill that doesn't really impact the mill rate. So it's not always a true comparison, but we still pull this information to provide a little bit of perspective for our city. We also apologize again. I think this next graph in terms of the outstanding debt is just a little off from when we looked at it, but general fund debt, the opening balance, and this is giving an outstanding debt of our city. And so in 2000, opening balance, $8 million, and less principal reduction payments of approximately $1.1 million leaves projected at the end of the year of about $6.8 million in debt. And all remaining utility debt was paid in full in 2018. So really, that is it in the city, and no new debt is added in 2019. We do know, though, as the Causeway project continues to evolve, that there will be a level of debt undertaken to complete that project. So that is not forecast in 2019, however. And again, there's additional information at our website, which we will have the complete financial plan was completed, the changes for the education property tax credit, our budget speech, including the community grants. It'll all be packaged up together on our website. So, Your Worship, that does conclude the presentation format in the open public hearing. And once the public hearing is closed, I'll move to the formal resolution phase.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Buds. Now we're going to open it up for questions or presentations from the floor. If anybody would like to do a presentation or register an objection to the financial plan. Evening, Ms. Anderson.
Good evening. I have some questions, and my first question is in regards to the announcement earlier that there would be $50,000 allocated for public transportation. And I would like to ask for clarification on, is that for a study, given that there have been previous studies, or how is it being allocated? And are there any other allocations in the 2019 plan towards a public transportation project?
Sure. Well, that's for a study, and I'll let Mr. Pito speak a little bit of the details of that.
Sure. Through your worship to the presenter, $50,000 is being held basically in a reserve that we can allocate during the year. It's subject to receiving equal funding from the FCM, so we've applied to the Federal Canadian Municipalities Fund. So if we are successful in receiving that fund, monies from that fund, we'll be able to apply for a feasibility study. So a feasibility study is needed if we hope to seek any additional funding from federal or provincial levels to fund any type of future project. If you don't have that feasibility study, you can't, it's non-starter for funding for capital investments, which means buses, bus stops, things like that. Or, as you know, other communities in this province are funded for their operation of their transportation system, which varies from city to city. So the $50,000 will only be spent if we are successful in receiving that grant. And how it is different than previous studies is that it's basically a larger take about different models that could be done in the city. And for that purpose, more information that we could receive future funding from other levels of government.
Do you know approximately when you might know if you get the matching funding?
I'm not entirely sure when the funding window has closed for that. I think it's a continuous intake for the funding. However, our goal is to have that information, and hopefully, if we are successful in receiving that funding, we would have the study done for consideration for council in the 2020 budget.
Thank you. If I may go to my next question, if I don't think there's any.
I don't see any other questioners. Other than the fellow back behind you, I don't know if he... No, okay.
My next question relates to the budget allocations for 2018 and 19 for economic development services. In 2018, the allocation was $179,400 for budget, and the actual was $421,856. And in 2019, the allocation again will be at $179,400. So my question relates to why the difference in 2018 that was unanticipated.
Who would like to answer that question?
I unfortunately was not around in those years, so I don't have the insight. I'd like to defer it to you.
Your worship, if you give us a moment, I will confer with Ms. Mcfarland and see if we have an answer for that.
Sure.
Clarify again, which line? Page 1, under Economic Development Services. It's about halfway down. You're talking about the line. Oh, sorry, Kathy. Do you want me to show you? Right here, Kathy.
I don't know what Kathy
You're talking about the line that has 179,400 on it? Yes. And what was your question? So in 2018, the budgeted amount for economic development services was 179,400. Actual pre-audit is 421,856. And then in 2019, the budget allocation, again, will go back to 179,400. My question was why the unanticipated difference? What caused that?
We've done some realignment in the economic development area. We used to have our own resources in there as well. We have people who work in, marketing of economic development within the city, and we've realigned that into another department.
So yeah, I realize that some of this relates to 2018 as opposed to the 19 plan, but initial projections for 18 was 179,400. Then it went to 421,000 approximately, but the budget for this year goes back to 179,400. So it seemed like it was an unusual expenditure rather than a realignment.
I think I'd like to have some time to look at that and get you a more complete answer.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just chime in as sitting on the PRED board that on the view of this, you could take a look and say, the expenditures that have been rolled up in the finalized statement of 2018, one might conclude when reading that the Economic Development Services would say that that was money that was expended in the Department of PRED. That is not the case. Year over year, the budget for 2018 and 19 remains unchanged for the services of PRED. Just as a comment to that.
If I go then to, just for seeking a bit of clarification, on page, there's a breakdown on the PRED allocation. It's numbered as page 3, 4, and 5. I'm sorry. I think it's actually page 4, I believe. So there is a further breakdown of economic development services, but it still shows the regional development as 150,000 and the actual was 402,000. Yeah, so that's fine. It's just that something that Councillor Budd said, it seemed like it was an increase for a reason, but that's fine if you can let me know later. Thank you. My last is to express a concern, objection, and that is in terms of the looking at the allocation of spending $3 million this year and the rest for the new Causeway versus when you look at how the expenditures are being looked at long-term for water, sewer, dealing with breakdowns, replacement plans, and also for paving and repairs on the roads in the city, especially when I look at the allocations for the roads. And I realize this is a decision council will make, so for this one I am just voicing an objection. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of information needs to be talked about. So the difference in the paving overlays would be a result of the change in the bridge and road program from the province. So those
yeah, thank you, Your Worship. They're obviously, and we've talked about it at great length here in terms of our participation levels from the provincial government when it comes to roads and bridges. I know there's been a recent announcement for some topping up, and so as a council we are discussing how that affects our pavement overlay, and that hasn't been decided just yet. But there's no question, as I mentioned in the presentation, that we have a lot of assets here at the City of Portage, and assets that require continual improvement, maintenance, repair, and so I understand the comment made, and that's definitely something that we deliberate on when we go through budget and capital expenditures. So no question, there's the understanding of the maintenance of the assets, and then the development of some of the things that we need to do in our city as well. And the Causeway is one that this council has charted a path to proceed with.
Just a comment on the utility expenditures. So the utility fund utility budget is separate from the operating, and those revenues come from the users and also from the province and sometimes the federal government. But mainly it's not tax money, although it comes from mostly us taxpayers that also use sewer and water within the city, and also people that buy water through co-ops. Was there any other presenters or questions? Okay. I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Be it resolved, and I so move that public hearing for tax levy bylaw 19-8693 now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Espy. Any questions or comments on the motion? None? All those in favor? That's carried.
All right, so moving to the actual recommendation here. The background is obviously we approved our 2019 budget for the City of Portage la Prairie back in February. The tax levy bylaw is comprised of the 2019 budget and the financial plan and sets the mill rates needed to raise the tax dollars. The 10-year capital and debt management plan are also part of the financial plan. And so the 2019 budget estimates rely on $11.6 million in property taxes to meet all the expenditures not recovered by other revenues. And as I alluded to in my presentation, there is a tremendous amount of growth and there is a tremendous amount of dollars being spent on supporting infrastructure for roads, bridges, safety equipment, water, and sewer. And so we did allude to our the expenditure of Phase 1 for a Causeway at $3 million and $5.5 million for utility infrastructure beyond government funds for updates to water and wastewater treatment of $16.5. So we are expending a tremendous amount of money in infrastructure in 2019. So after the same property tax mill rate of 20.6762 for 3 years, we did a very good job of maintaining that mill rate here at the city, a slight increase of 0.299 to the mill rate, or $2.99 per each $10,000 worth of proportioned property value is needed to provide for these costs in 2019. And we do have the school division mill rate, and so we can see again that comparison to year over year. I did talk a little bit about what those changes would look like from an assessed value, from a taxation value based on your assessment, and then we will have the tax calculator there on our website. The debt management plan is incorporated into the enhanced 10-year capital plan. Details regarding this plan for funding the general utility projects are identified in the 2019 financial presentation document. So it is the recommendation of the committee, and I so move. You know what? Before I go there, this last statement I think is very important. I did talk to it about the maximum amount of debt that the city currently has, and we do sometimes hear about where our debt ceiling is as a city, and so I think it's important to mention that we're only using 33% of our debt capacity, and I think given the amount of infrastructure that has been planned for and will be spent in the next number of years, that we've done a very good job of managing debt to investment ratio. And so there's a tremendous amount of growth, and our city will have to encumber itself over the next number of years in order to complete some projects. But what we've done through strong fiscal management is put ourselves in a position to be able to do that. And that wouldn't have been done without the hard work of not only this council, but councils before in order to put ourselves in that position. So I'm very happy with where we're at. So on that note, it is a recommendation of my committee, and I so move that bylaw number 19-8693, being a bylaw of the City of Portage la Prairie to authorize the levying and raising of property taxes for school and municipal purposes for the year ending December 31st, 2019, be given first reading.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Espy. Any questions or comments on the motion? I just have one comment. I just want to thank the people that worked so hard on this financial plan. This is a thoughtful document that will see us well into the future, and I know this involved a lot of months of work by our staff and members of council. So all those involved, I want to thank very much. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Okay, that concludes this evening's public hearings. We're going to move into committees. First up is Finance, Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds.
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. City Planning and Economic Development. Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. City Planning and Economic Development Committee have nothing to report.
Thank you. Community Service Committee. Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Worship. This evening we do have second and third readings of our Urban Indigenous Peoples Coalition bylaw for the City of Portage la Prairie. We did go through that extensively last council meeting. It's a bylaw required to govern our newly formed Portage Urban Indigenous Peoples Coalition. that is a mouthful, being a committee consisting of 2 city councillors, the city's Indigenous coordinator, and several appointed members as outlined in the bylaw. And so this evening, I let it be resolved that bylaw number 19-8692, being the Urban Indigenous Peoples Coalition bylaw of the City of Portage la Prairie, now be read a second time. Oh.
Moved by Councillor Draycott. And seconded by Councillor Knox. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
And finally, let it be resolved that bylaw 19-8692 now be read a third time, finally passed, signed, and sealed. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Draycott and seconded by Councillor Knox. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
And that is all for Community Services Committee this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Draycott. Councillor Wall, Waterworks Committee, please.
Yes, Your Worship, Waterworks has nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Transportation Committee, Councillor Espy.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Transportation Committee has nothing to report.
Thank you. Public Safety Committee, Councillor Knox.
Thanks, Your Worship. We have nothing to report this evening.
Okay, thank you. We have some deferred business. First up is Conditional Use PC 1319. This is for Bridge Road Land Management Limited. This is under Planning and Economic Development. Councillor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor, or Council, as you are aware, last council meeting, we did have a motion that was on the table that addressed the recommendation from administration. Through our conversation, we did defer the motion to the next meeting to align it more with a previous, the way a previous wording was. And it was pointed out that we still had that resolution on the table. I'm going to read it back for council, and so we knew exactly where it's at. That was already moved and seconded. So the resolution that's still live on the books is, be it resolved that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of Bridge Road Land Management Limited to allow for multifamily dwellings in a C3 Avenue commercial zone at the property on corner of Park Drive and 18th Street Northwest. This is which is legally described as Lot 22, Block 5, Plan 1810, Parish of Portage la Prairie. That was moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Butts at the time.
So that's the motion on the floor for council. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Wall.
Yes, Your Worship. At the last meeting, this motion was, there was an amendment to this motion offered and then defeated. The defeated amendment was basically to put into this resolution these recommendations by the railroad for sound attenuation berms and studies for vibration and so on. Now, the City of Portage had already entered into a development agreement and a land purchase agreement with the developer. And at that time, there was no mention of all these conditions. The city did know that what the intended use of the land was, and we also knew that this change from C3 to residential would be necessary to complete the project. By adding this CN requirement, we're adding thousands of dollars to the cost of the developer after the fact, after we've signed an agreement, after we've sold the property. And if you read further in the recommendations attached to the motion that would come forward if this one is defeated, there's a warning from Canadian National Railways and a recommendation that the following clause should be inserted in all development agreements, offers to purchase, and agreements of purchase and sale of each dwelling unit within 300 meters of the railway. We failed to do that in the past. Had we done that, then these conditions wouldn't be the surprise that they are. And I also have a concern about if we attach these conditions, who will enforce them? These conditions come from CNR. They're not ours. I don't believe CNR could enforce them. I suppose that would leave it up to us to enforce them. So, what I would like to do, and what I had intended to do when I made the amendment at the last meeting, was to attach this clause that's recommended in the future to this variance, to this conditional use, I should say, and not all the recommendations for fencing and vibration equipment and so on. The warning reads, warning, Canadian National Railway Company or its signs or successors in interest has or have rights of way within 300 meters from the land subject hereof. There may be alterations to or expansions of the railway facilities on such rights of way in the future, including the possibility that the railway or its assigns or successors, as aforesaid, may expand its operations, which expansion may affect the living environment of the residents in the vicinity, notwithstanding the inclusion of any noise and vibration attenuation measures in the design of the development and individual dwellings. CNR will not be responsible for any complaints or claims arising from use of such facilities and/or operations on, over, or under the aforesaid rights of way. Now, over the years, I lived for a good length of time on Gigot Avenue. My yard was 200 feet deep, and it backed right onto the railway tracks. Those homes on Gigot Avenue, I don't think have any problem with vibration or noise from the railway, as long as the railway maintains its agreed to speed limit through the city and doesn't blow their whistle at crossings. And I just think it's unfair to include all these conditions after the fact and cause hardship and cost to the developer. So my recommendation would be to approve the conditional use as presented with the warning attached, but not all the conditions.
Okay, to sum up, Councillor Wall, you're speaking against the motion currently on the floor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, no, sir, I'm sorry, that's not correct. I'm speaking in favor of the motion that we tabled last week with no amendments or anything. But I would like to make an amendment to that motion. And the amendment would be to add the warning that I just read, but to not include the conditions.
So am I right understanding that we're dealing with the amendment to the motion
would have
that's
to be
on the
seconded.
books? Correct.
Before we can discuss it.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Wall, second by Councillor Knox. No, the amendment?
With an amendment.
The original motion has mover and seconder from Councillor Meyer, Councillor Buds from last meeting. And if you could just read back the amendment so everybody's clear.
So the original motion with the warning at the end is what you're
The
proposing?
amendment would
Is
be the
everybody
warning.
comfortable with that and understanding what the original recommendation was with the warning?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
Councillor
So we
Betts.
have a mover and a seconder, so we're discussion now. I originally had brought this up at last meeting so that we wanted to make sure that we send administration back to understand the relationship with another piece of property that we had sold in that vicinity. Can I get administration's clarity on what it says in that land sale agreement as it relates to this particular item, CN?
Through your worship to Councillor Buds, the administrative, as it was tasked to administration to be consistent with the, I believe you're referring to the Prarie property sale. On your report, you see or revised administration recommendation April 23rd. Below that, that would be the motion that would be required if you wanted to be consistent with the previous Prarie conditional use.
Which, okay, thank you. And so one developer could be viewed as still having to follow the criteria for residential development next to CN lines, and the next one would be just the warning. So we would be somewhat inconsistent in our application of this issue.
I believe that we made an error with the Bukhari.
Regardless of an error was made, we would be inconsistent.
Well, and similar to allowing school division to not pave a piece of property when we've required a lot of other people to pave parking lots.
I have a question for Mr. Brooks. The comment was made earlier that, we sold a piece of property and then a conditional use application came in, and now there's a view that there's additional expense related to the development of that property. It's certainly not uncommon for properties to be sold, and a change of use of that property requires a conditional use application, which could occur and has historically had situations where a developer has to invest more money as a result of a conditional use, and knowing that going into a purchase. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
If I may add, through your worship to Councillor Buds, both the sale and development agreement for this property are subject to the conditional use.
So the developer knew there was a conditional use requirement, and as such, some of these things that need to be addressed would have been outlined, I guess, at the sale.
Except that these particular conditions were not outlined at the sale, and the warning that's recommended to be attached to development agreements in the future was not used.
So one more point of clarity. The warning is actually CN recommending that warning. So that's not coming from administration. CN is saying all of those bulleted points should be addressed when you do a conditional use. Is that not correct, Mr. Pito? That's some of the feedback that we've received from CN. So the warning would be included, as well as their recommendation for everything else in that. Am I wrong in my assessment of that?
I would say no, and I would also say that, as Mr. Pito said, if the sale is conditional on the conditional use being approved, they'll get this conditional use letter with the requirements on it, and they can still back out of the deal if they want to at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So, sorry, just a quick question of clarification. So the following clause, the warning, that doesn't sum up the first 5 bullet points. That's in addition to the 5 bullet points that are there. And was that warning originally on the other one that council approved?
We didn't approve anything. Or you mean on the Bukhari?
On the Bukhari one.
Yeah. It's very similar. It's not exact.
Okay.
The original one for Mcfarland was, you got to remember, this is CP and CN we're dealing with. CP was Mcfarland, this is CN. They're not identical, but they are very similar, yes.
Oh, okay, so it was a different rail line.
But I think it was mentioned that if we were actually to accept the administrative recommendation, that the applicant follow the CN criteria, it would be consistent with the approach taken on the previous.
Sorry, follow the
Yes.
CP recommendations.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, further questions or comments on the amended motion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the amended motion? All those opposed? And that's defeated.
I would like to put a new resolution on the table.
It's just the amendment.
Oh, sorry,
that's
that was
been
just the
defeated
amendment.
now.
I'm sorry.
So we're back to the original motion made last council meeting, moved by Councillor Meyer, seconded by Councillor Buds. And would you like to read that out one more time?
I would love to read that out, Your Worship. As soon as I can find it. Okay, so the motion that was on the table, or is on the table right now, be it resolved that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of Bridge Road Land Management Limited to allow for multi-family dwellings in a C3 Avenue commercial zone at the property on corner of Park Drive and 18th Street Northwest, which is legally described as Lot 22, Block 5, Plan 1810, Parish of Portage la Prairie, originally moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Buds.
Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? And that's defeated.
At this time, Your Worship, I would like to bring up a different resolution, if I may, relating to the conversation that we just had previous. I would like to revise the motion to read that the city, or the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of Bridge Road Land Management Limited to allow multifamily dwelling units in a C3 Avenue commercial zone at the property located on the corner of Park Drive and 18th Street Northwest, which is legally described as Lot 22, Block 5, Plan 1810, Parish of Portage la Prairie, with the condition that the applicant follow the CN criteria for residential development next to the CN lines. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Meyer and seconded by Councillor Buds. Questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Okay, we have some new business. First off is a variation extension for PC 10-19. This is Malko Developments Limited. And again, this is City Planning and Economic Development. Councillor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And of course, the issue we have is to allow an extension of the original variation of Malko Developments Limited, which is PC 20-18, to vary the front yard requirement of 7.5 meters to be reduced to 6.5 meters. This is just an extension of the original variation order. It's not uncommon. The original variation council was passed by resolution number 2018-0048 on April the 23rd of 2018 for an additional 12 months. You're going to see where the planning section states that a variance order will expire and cease to have any effect if it is not acted upon within 12 months of the date of decision, and a board or council or planning commission may extend the deadline under subsection 1 for an additional period not longer than 12 months if an application is received before the initial deadline. So it's a recommendation, and I so move that the Council of City Portage la Prairie approve the request of Malko Developments Limited to extend the original variation order PC 20-18 at the properties on 6, 16, 18 Spence Lane, which are legally described as lots 1, 6, 7, Block 3, Plan 53601, Parish of Portage la Prairie.
Moved by Councillor Meyer and seconded by Councillor Buds. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. That completes our new business. We have no old business. Just before we adjourn, I just want to mention, normally I mention this in committee, however, our youth councillor has to leave early tonight, or has to leave by 7:30. So I just want to mention that I had the privilege of attending a Meet Your Council event at the high school last week, as did many of our council. And I just want to say, for the people that weren't there, how well organized it was and how well attended it was. And I'm sure we'll hear more detail in the next quarterly report from Councillor Agarwal, but I just wanted to mention that this evening before we adjourn. And council is adjourned at 7:18 p.m. and we're going to move right into committee in about 1 minute. Thank you.
Your Worship, can I just have a word while we're adjourned?
Yep. Computer's had a hard time ever since daylight savings time.
Computer, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Can you please get his committee report up on his computer, please? Not a long one.
Planning and Economic Development, Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The City and Planning and Economic Development Committee has, for your information, Council, tonight, the 2019 PRED first quarter report. Due to the demands of the job, our executive or our Economic Development Officer is unable to be here tonight. Will be on Council agenda next Council meeting if there's any questions, but it does revolve around the workforce development, the marketing, of course, the tourism, and every area that PRED is involved in. So, and that is the end of my report.
Okay. Community Services Committee, Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This evening we do have Cornell Pache, I believe, in the gallery. Mr. Pache, would you be able to give us your Indigenous Coordinator, Community Coordinator presentation this evening?
Yes, I will. I thought That's it?
We have a mouse for you to use.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks and say thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you for that first and second and third reading when it came to establishing our coalition. It's a work in progress, and since September we've worked hard in trying to engage the urban Indigenous organizations in meetings and discussion, and both in economic and both with the community meetings, engagement, discussions that we've had, both with in regards to education, in regards to youth, and in regards to that issues that surround First Nations. And according to the status of a census in 2016, it was found that 60% of the First Nation population was moving off reserve or considered off reserve, while 40% was on reserve, and that's when Canada had decided that it was in their best interest to to develop a strategy to meet that increased percentage. So as a result of that, since September, we've been working hard with trying to find and identify, what the Indigenous population was during our history throughout Portage la Prairie. And we found that, well, as you are all aware, that 13,300 was total population of Portage la Prairie, and of that, 23% was identified as Aboriginal, with 10.5 First Nation and 12.1 Métis, and increasing. And as a part of that reconciliation in the past number of years, the government had wanted to improve and adopt the 94 calls to action. And of the 94 calls to action, we had looked at reconciliation in itself, and had wanted to build. They wanted to have a strategic plan in place with the Indigenous community that surrounds Portage la Prairie, and we'll find that we're surrounded with the First Nation, with Kishkimequaw, Long Plains, and various others that are inside Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council and Southern SCO and Southern Chiefs. So they were, in the spirit of reconciliation, it felt that the city of Portage la Prairie is a community in the need of a stronger partnership, better cooperation, and increased dialogue with its urban Indigenous population. And in response to that Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, other coalitions in nationally, and other coalitions in other cities have adopted, have identified the calls to action specific to their municipalities, which included calls to action 43, which wanted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that was identified in number 34 in the Truth and Reconciliation. And also identified was 47, which was a doctrine that called on the municipal governments to reform the laws that previously had sovereignty, Indigenous peoples, and lands. Calls to action 57, which was the training, professional development training for public servants requirement. And calls to action 75 in regards to cemeteries recognition, and just there was a lot of identifying. There was a lot of cemeteries, a lot of Aboriginal history that was a part of that specific 75. So we're hoping to identify those as we future-wise. Call to action 77, which was archives, which is a call to action to see the legacy and the effect of residential school, because we found that as a result of residential school, in regards to education, in regards to the impact that it had on Indigenous First Nations, we, as a result of those calls to action, we felt that there was we had to recognize that impact that legacy or that experience had on residential schools, in regards to education, in regards to economies, in regards to trapping, fishing, etc. So since then, we've been, the initiative was to build and support good relations between the city and Indigenous peoples, organizations that serve Indigenous people, and maintaining that connection and continued with increased cooperation and dialogue with the surrounding First Nations and urban Indigenous, the urban Indigenous community. And since September, we've collaboration has been established with the following representatives and organizations, and there's revitalization, as you can read. There's Friendship Center, School Division, Red River, PCI, Portage Planning Committee, Arrowhead Development, Canadian Mental Health, Brandon University, Selden Health Santé Sioux, Manitoba Justice Community Area Director, ROC, Probation Services, RCMP, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, and Manitoba Housing, and you could read the list as you go through. And as a result of that dialogue, we've managed to work with Hub, and I know that you're all aware of Hub and its intent, and when it was established in May of last year, it was a group of stakeholders or service providers that identified risk. And as a part of that, in September, in my role, it was identifying that participation and wanting to include more of that Indigenous participation in including those organizations in DOTC, in childcare, MICHIF, etc., and trying to include that try to include more of their Indigenous participation at the table, and we were able to have that done, and a 7-day training course took place in order to train those individuals to be around that table. So those are some of the initiatives that we've been working on. In addition to IANI and Indigenous employment, we've worked with them and identified some of the barriers to employment, some of the barriers to Indigenous, and the impact that when it came to Indigenous opportunity. We also supported, when it came to the school division, there was we supported a group of young women in regards to their meeting on a monthly basis. There were some issues that were occurring within the group itself amongst especially the Indigenous young women from the various First Nations, and having them as a part of the school. So we work closely with the school division to engage a process where that group could meet on a weekly basis. I think it was bi-weekly basis, so that they could work towards their improving their having that discussion and improving their relations amongst each other. So, and restorative justice, we also sit as a part of as a board member on the Justice Committee. Portage la Prairie works with the youth. Also participating in the school division in their leadership classes when it comes to history, when it comes to the Indigenous history component part of it, and having identifying elders and just individuals to be a part of that class. And we also were a part of the Portage School Division in the Long Plain Junior Council, and having them engage and organize and be a part of the Youth and Elder Conference that we on February 20th that we participated in. And also a part of the National Urban Indigenous Coalition and the establishment of the National Coalition. We've been to 3 meetings as a part of other coalitions throughout Canada and even and Manitoba, to be a part of that coalition to look at urban Indigenous issues happening in other areas. And just being a part of Services Canada, wanting the coalition, the group, and wanting to look at that strategy and wanting to identify how ways and means in which they could have a coalition that they can call upon to engage discussion. And we are also looking at the Bear Clan initiative in what's been happening with Winnipeg and in Brandon and other areas. So we're still at the early stages of that and having a presentation being done. And as a part of the Economic Development Conference, we were hoping, as a part of the community plan, to engage a conference with Brandon and Southern Chiefs organizations and ourselves and the surrounding First Nations. They, what we had found is May of last year, they had an economic development conference in Winnipeg, and we were hoping to engage a similar kind of conference with the First Nations around the area, but our Canada had wanted to, INAC wanted to look at having SCO, whether that, as a part of their engagement with the first one, they needed to have a second one, so we're still in planning stages on that one in the hopes of having one similar in Brandon, and that's where they're hoping to have the discussions there when it came to economic development and in the future. And also participating in Community Futures, organizing, I think we had about 47 individuals be a part of a workshop from the surrounding First Nations when it came to how to start a business. And in this instance here, we were trying to find ways and means in which to engage parental involvement, increased parental involvement with the education of First Nations, the students, the parents, and in this instance here, we had almost 45 teachers and counselors and school division participate in engagement strategy with Dakota TP, and you know, we were trying to find ways in which to have the division come to them, and we were successful in that endeavor. And as a part of that, there's a second meeting being held as a part of that plan to have the parents participate in our barbecue at one of the schools that they identify, and I think it's Yellow Quill, that they're hoping to have that in June sometime. And I know you want to get home. And future initiatives, there's a cultural component commemorating a plaque on Wilkinson Crescent where we were talking with Heritage and wanted to identify a plaque that were remains that were found, and I think it was 2007, 2008, where there was remains that were found on Wilkinson Crescent, and as a part of that, they want to, historical and ourselves and surrounding First Nations are looking to work towards you know, completing that initiative and having a plaque set up on that site. Also working with Heritage to include future Indigenous streets to be named in relation to our Aboriginal history. And also trying to arrange a cultural Aboriginal, or well, just a awareness week and cultural awareness week with the city and school division. And also to develop a strategic plan in establishing that working relationship with our Indigenous urban organizations and surrounding First Nations, and future engagement discussions to include youth, women, and elder sharing circles. Going backwards. And also the establishment of Indigenous Council. We've already we've identified the stakeholders, and we had our first meeting on March 18th, and as a part of that coalition of stakeholders, we still needed to have 4 open calls to citizens, Indigenous, urban, and we were able to complete that process, and we're hoping by the year's end to well, we've had our second meeting already, so we're hoping to carry on. And we've had one representative from Health Sante Sioux, Portage Friendship Center, Revitalization. Still working on one representative from the tribe, Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council. There's a couple of individuals there that have expressed their interest, and they're still working on who that member is. Same with the Southwest Métis. They still need confirmation from their head office in Brandon to have their local chapter participate. We have one member from School Division, which is Cuddington, Superintendent. We also have Portage RCMP, Red River Community College, and the 4 representatives, 2 members of council here, and myself and City Manager Nathan. And that's a picture of Palm Plains Junior Council. And key actions to form a coalition with identified partners who meet monthly and provide an ongoing guidance and feedback on Indigenous needs in Portage la Prairie, and holding 3 to 6 community outreach and brainstorming sessions, which we've had 3. And we've had, as I said, we've had our first Indigenous Youth Conference and Elder in February 20th of this year, where we had almost 120 participants and 94 in participate from the high schools. And there's the goals, objectives, formal framework for Indigenous coalitions, which we've completed. And that's my presentation. I originally had it down to 8, but it's at 14, so sorry.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Pache. You are definitely a very busy individual. You've accomplished a lot already and have very clear, defined goals. So we look forward to hearing how things continue to go.
Thank you. So, Councillor Draycott, I had a question. I think other members of council, just for clarification, did Mr. Pache say there had already been a council meeting?
We've had 2 Indigenous council meetings on 18th and last week, just to engage the stakeholders and have a participation agreement with them prior to them in formalizing the meeting.
Okay. Okay, good. Councillor Budge, you had a question?
Yeah, I think that you've done a fantastic job and outlined a lot of the initiatives and goals here. I view a very, very important 2 seats at the Indigenous Council. So from my perspective, it was surprising a little bit that we have not seen the establishment of the representative from the DOTC as well as regional Métis or MFF. Is there a timeline when those chairs or those seats could be filled to round out the Indigenous Council?
We had confirmation from the Métis from Brandon speaking to their office, so they're very shortly will have both representatives at the table, both from DOTC and Southwest.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for Councillor Draycott or Mr. Pache? Okay. Thank you very much for coming out and spending a long evening with us. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
To continue my Community Services Committee this evening, we do have first quarter reports as well for PCRC, as well as the Youth Councillor. Those I'd like to defer unless there's any questions I can answer this evening, but till our council meeting, where I hope to have some good conversation with Victoria Espy and our Youth Councillor as well. You can see, looking through all of our quarterly reports for community services, that many of these organizations are intertwined. As Mr. Pache said, he's been working with PCRC and the Heritage Advisory Committee. The Heritage Advisory Committee notes that they've been working with Mr. Pache, as does PCRC in their quarterly reports. So there's a lot of activity in our community right now on the community services portfolio, and a lot of collaboration, which I think is very important on those. If there's any other questions that I might be able to answer for those quarterly reports. Hearing none, that would conclude my committee report this evening.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Draycott. Councillor Wall, Waterworks Committee.
Yes, Your Worship, Waterworks has nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Transportation Committee, Councillor Meyer for Councillor Espy.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Transportation Committee has nothing to report.
Thank you. And Councillor Knox, Public Safety Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we do have two reports, first quarter reports from bylaw enforcement and RCMP in front of you to read. Just a note that I'll make is in our last report there was a question that came up about the number of tickets written, and it is noted in this report that there has been a disciplinary issue that was addressed in February, and ticket writing is improving in March, so that is good news. In the RCMP report, I'll just note I don't think it's going to be too surprising to anybody around this table, but also at the same time alarming that all of our levels of person crime, property crime, attempted theft, break and enter, and mischief in our community have all gone up in this quarter compared to the quarter last year. And important to note that this was a very cold quarter, so that's not a good trend for us to see in such cold weather even. So we definitely do have a lot of initiatives happening in our community that we'll hear more of over the year when it comes to crime prevention. I'll just put a plug out there that Citizens on Patrol are always continually recruiting new members. We do have a bunch of new members, but always looking, and the time commitment is a 3-hour-a-month time commitment to be a COPP member, so keep that in mind. Anything you would like to add, Phil?
I guess the only thing I would add to it that you mentioned already, the increase in property crime as an example, talking with Inspector today that he mentioned that, again, the use of meth is definitely a main factor there, that they can correlate that increase from last year.
Thank you. Yeah, and just a reminder too, I guess it is that time of year that it's also our responsibility as citizens to protect our property as well. So lock your bikes up, put them in the garage, do your best to do those sort of things. Use the new bike locks around our community, and we'll see more of them. That's it, Your Worship, for this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, before we adjourn, I just want to acknowledge the Terriers' victim in a hard-fought game last night, and they're moving up to the next level. And I'm very, very pleased that I will be sending a Terrier jersey to Swan River, and the mayor will be wearing it at his next council meeting, and I'll try to get a photo and share it with everybody. I mean everybody. Thank you for coming out and staying with us tonight. And, oh, one more announcement. So this Friday at 12 noon, we're having a special meeting of council, and that's to award the tender for the Crescent Lake Causeway construction. So 12 sharp, it's open to the public, it's open to the media, and we'll be advertising it. And committee is adjourned at 7:47 p.m.